Dan Kennedy and Andrew Anderson talk. The one question no one ever asks but should. Brought to you by IQ Marketers. Smart, profitable marketing made easy. Hey, Dan, how are you doing today?
I'm doing great. How are you?
I'm doing fantastic. I'm talking to Dan Kennedy, and the hardest man in the world to get a hold of, and it's sunny out in Cleveland today, so miracles never cease.
There you go.
Yep. The two-part question here. I'll make it real quick. Since I'm a big believer in we don't know what we don't know, what's the one question that people don't ask you about marketing that they should? That's the first question. And then the last question is trotters or pacers?
So the first question is there's a variable in there. So there's, different people don't ask different questions. and there's different questions right somewhat for different situations. I would say that the two places, I'll give you three. The three places people err in most. One is in not trying to calculate, measure, and use differential customer value rather than averaged customer value. And therefore, they aren't very discriminatory in who they set out to get and in what they can afford to spend to get them. So in consulting on marketing, one of the questions I have to ask that rarely is the answer volunteered, it has to be asked for, and it usually has to be pressed for, is what's your maximum allowable? Meaning, what's the absolute maximum you'll pay to get a lead? What's the absolute maximum, more importantly, you'll pay to get a customer, client, or patient? Because that number now governs everything that can be done and can't be done. And most people get to that number without differential value. So, for example, if they have a shoe store, so there's a guy right in the little shopping center I go to all the time who just opened a Red Wing franchised shoe store. And I don't have high hopes for him, but I have best wishes for him. But most people owning that business, if they could answer the maximum allowable question or would go get a number to answer it, it would be based on what's a customer worth to me, say, in a year. And so they would take their total sales and they would divide it by the total number of customers. And they would find that a customer is worth, let's say, $200 to them. And if they work at a 50% margin, they would say 100. And then they would come up with a number they were comfortable with, less than 100 in most cases, which even that's not necessarily correct. But they would come up with a number less than 100 that they were comfortable with, and they would set that as their maximum allowable. Now, they would never go figure out, gee, a customer with 4 kids all needing shoes is worth more than a customer with 1 kid, and they're worth more than a customer with no kids. And so the maximum allowable ought to be different forever. So that whole thinking process does not occur. Those questions don't get asked, and the information never gets used to variably weight investment in marketing. Does that make sense to you?
Absolutely.
Okay. The second most common error then is in a single message to multiple constituencies. And so it'll either be one big broad, here's who we are, what we do, and here's the 52 things we got message. or it will at least acknowledge there are different constituencies, but it will still try and lump them all into the same message. Example, if you own a big house with a big basement, then these 5 things we do will interest you. If you live in an apartment, then these 3 things we do will interest you, but it'll all be in the same message. One ad, one website, one VSL, one whatever. And increasingly, people have a sense of entitlement for 2 things. What is specifically for them and instant, on demand. Don't have time to talk about the second, but the first is obvious in this conversation. So if there's 5 constituencies, the smart marketing play is 5 completely separate marketing systems under one umbrella, as if you were really running 5 different businesses. The third place people err most commonly in marketing discussions is having advertising and marketing and selling separated as if they were 3 different functions instead of one integrated function. And often that'll be coupled with conflict between franchisor and franchisees, or corporate C-suite and salespeople in the street. I have a picture. It's of a boardroom, and there's like 12 people sitting around the conference table in the boardroom, and they're all pointing at each other. And so this is no, this is your responsibility, sales. No, this is your responsibility, advertising, as opposed to everybody putting their heads together and creating a integrated process. So you see bad follow-up on prospects, for example, because the C-suite says, well, salespeople should follow up on prospects. And so that's the third area where I wind up doing a lot of work, and difficult work, is fighting for integration rather than separation. Your second question, there's one breed, there's 2 gaits, trot and pace. I own and drive both. Just bought at the yearling sale yesterday a $25,000 trotter. No real preference to have bought a trotter. Might just as easily have bought a pacer. From a ownership and from a driving standpoint, they each have their pluses and minuses. Is that enough to appease your curiosity?
Yeah, I was just curious. Usually someone has a preference, but I know you're a driver too, so.
Cool. Some people will sloppily call them all trotters. And at one time, way back, they all were. The trot is the natural original gait of standardbreds. Pacing was a taught gait. We have evolved all the way to the point now that there are pacer bloodlines and trotter bloodlines. But you will hear old timers say, I'm going to the trotters tonight. And they really don't mean that. They mean they're going to the racetrack, and there will be trot races and there will be pace races.
Right. Cool. Yeah, we have both growing up. They each got their own different.
Yeah. Were you around the business?
Yeah. We had 7 usually. I don't know why, but that's the number. Shoveled a lot of stuff.
Yeah, one of the greatest innovations from the time I left young to the time I came back in the entire industry was the open-ended shit wagon with the ramp.
Yes.
So you could use a wheelbarrow instead of a basket you had to hoist.
Yeah.
That was a big breakthrough in the business.
All right. Thank you very much for your time. I appreciate it. That was a great answer. Thank you.